Hey everyone, here today for a one-on-one interview is Allison Schrager. Allison is the senior fellow at the Manhattan Institute, also an opinion columnist over at Bloomberg, talking all things what to expect for the upcoming Trump economy 2.0. Allison, grateful for your time.
Thanks for having me.
So I think at this point, the average American voter, the U.S. consumer, is roughly familiar with the president-elect's plan for tariffs. Of course, the president-elect says doesn't always jive with what major economists say. What is your take on the promise for tariffs and your expectations, Allison, for how they'll be used come January 20th?
Well, I mean, it's always a bit of a surprise with Trump. And, to his credit or detriment, he likes to experiment. He likes to try things. And if they don't work, he fires people and tries something else. So there's that. But I think I've always, I was raised as an economist to just hate tariffs just instinctively. But I'm trying to be open-minded, as I am with any administration that comes in. So I think the way to think about it is it depends on what the goal is. Is he using tariffs as a bargaining chip to sort of secure better terms of trade? Because we truly don't have a free trade economy, and it would be nice to move to a freer trade economy with better, more fair terms. So is he using tariffs as a negotiating tactic? Or is he, I think, and this would describe the more J.D. Vance view of tariffs, you want to use tariffs to reshape the American economy and bring back dying industries. So I think the first one wouldn't be terrible, and in fact could be good. I mean, I remember in his first administration, at first I was horrified. He wanted to rip up NAFTA, but then he actually did come up with a better deal. And honestly, we should rethink trade deals from time to time because, the economy changes. Or, as I said, I guess it depends on how we're using them and what the objective is.
Could you talk to me more about why, as an economist, in your words, you were taught to hate tariffs originally? What's sort of the traditional orthodoxy, and in what ways has that been challenged?
Well, I mean, in economics, there's this central conceit of economics is there's very rarely a free lunch, right? Anything you do is probably going to make someone better off, but someone else worse off. But there's very few exceptions to that. And one of them has historically been free trade, which is if we trade more, we can all become richer. And, while there might be, some transition in winners and losers in the short run, overall, we all grow. Our trading partners grow, we grow. And I think we even did see that in the last couple decades is, prices did go down. We had low inflation. And, we did have certain industries grow. Of course, I think having 1 billion workers come on the global labor market very suddenly from China's joining the global order, did cause more disruption than we were used to. But generally, I think economists think of trade as increasing prosperity, increasing growth, increasing the pace of innovation, and just generally being a net positive for the economy.
Allison, have you been surprised with the market reaction so far since Election Day? I don't think it's a stretch to say, at least for the most part, while we're still awaiting details, markets seem pretty okay with the plan for tariffs that the president-elect has already talked about.
Well, no. I mean, in 2016, when he won, I remember at the time, I was like, the world's going to end. And the next day, the stock market opened higher. So I expected that again. I think the markets are sort of, again, trying to go with the first view, which was tariffs are going to be about better deals rather than restructuring the U.S. economy to something we had 40 years ago, and is focusing more on the deregulation and lower taxes. Because even if you look at sort of the Penn budget model and all of these, they all predicted the Trump plan, as it was stated, would increase economic growth. They also said it would increase debts a lot, but it is largely a growth agenda. So I think I'm not surprised because markets tend to like Republican administrations that tend to be easier in regulation and lower in taxes. And I think they're being optimistic that I think we'll know a lot about Trump's Treasury pick, about whether or not this is going to be across the board, 20% tariffs on all countries, 60% or more on China, or whether or not this is just a lot of bluster to bring better deals.
Allison, in a recent piece of yours, you wrote how the populist surge in the United States can threaten our nation's future growth. Talk to me more about that thinking, especially in light of what you just said, that despite concerns from economists that the Trump plan would lead to higher inflation than Harris's plan, it would lead to higher annual federal deficits than the Harris plan, you still say that there is still a big growth component.
Yeah, I mean, because parts of it are more populist than others. As I said, like his instinct, I think, to deregulate, to make the government more efficient, as I said, and lower taxes, do increase growth. I think people get confused because we often say, I think supply-side economists in the 80s oversold what tax cuts could do. They are growth enhancing. They're not growth enhancing enough to pay for themselves, though. And that's an important distinction. I think they sold them as they're going to unleash so much growth they pay for themselves. And that's just not true. Or it is true, but not at the tax levels we have right now. I mean, if you have like 150% tax, obviously cutting taxes is going to increase growth enough to pay for itself, not where we are right now. So what I'm thinking about when I'm writing about right now is, I said, I still feel like a little uncertain about what not only is the Trump administration going to be, but what is the Republican Party's platform on the economy? Is it going to, because I sort of see, I'm not sure what Trump's goal is with the tariffs. I see J.D. Vance as more of a populist who actually does look at the economy of the 60s or the 70s and be like, more of that. Let's go back to that. We should make more things. We should have more manufacturing jobs. I think that strain of populism, I think, is going to sort of lower growth. I'm not sure if Trump really fully embraces that idea. I mean, honestly, he said some things that made me think that, but he said some things that made me not think that.
I want to drill down more specifically on groceries and food prices. What's your sense on what the Trump plan might be to try and bring those costs of everyday items down? And is that sort of an extension of targeted tariffs?
I don't get the sense he has a plan to do that. I think if you look at food price inflation, it is down. I think what the Harris was promising was to bring them down further, to bring them down to where they were in, say, 2020, 2021. And I hope Trump doesn't want to do that, because we actually would need deflation. And that would actually be a sign of a very sick economy, an economy that isn't growing, might even be shrinking. So I haven't heard Trump talk about bringing grocery prices back. Maybe you have, but he says a lot of things, so it's hard to keep track. Lowering prices versus just keeping prices from rising further. I think policymakers should just focus on keeping prices from rising further, but we pretty much already are there on food. So it's frustrating for consumers, but over time, I think the hope is the wages go up and they just get used to the higher prices on food, but can also afford them better.
Yeah, that's what Jay Powell said during his press conference at the last FOMC meeting. It's that exact thing, right? It's not so much the calculus of bringing prices down as much as it is hoping for real wages to continue to strengthen. To the point about the Fed, I wonder if you've given much thought to what you think the FOMC might take into consideration for 2025. I think they had a pretty steady path here in terms of late 24 interest rate cuts, but obviously now you're contending with a whole lot of new cross currents, whether it's additional tax cuts, extensions from 2017, new tariffs, or economic impacts of deportations. I mean, there's all going to be an economic impact for the Fed to consider, right?
Yeah, and as I said, we still just don't know what's going to happen. As I said, Trump sort of throws some things out there, some of them for negotiating purposes, some just to sort of, change expectations, and some he just can't do. So I guess we'll know. I think the Fed is at the very least looking and being like, it's going to be a hot economy. And I think it's hard even right now. The economy is already pretty hot. So it's already sort of borderline hard to justify having rate cuts right now. From a, game theoretic perspective, I guess the argument to cut rates now would be like the Fed could at least credibly claim, well, inflation's a little high, but it's pretty close to our target. So, hey, we did something. We lowered inflation. And if inflation breaks out again, we've proven we can do something about it. And that credibility will give them makes their policies more powerful. So, I guess the argument for cutting rates now is that, hey, we might have inflation come back, but we need to hold on to our credibility. And if we cut rates, we can declare victory. I mean, whether or not they should or not, because inflation's still a little high is debatable, but I think they could get away with that. But I think just in pure economic terms, it's really hard, I think, even now to really be justify cutting rates, because the GDP is up, wage growth is up, and So it's not clear that the rates where they are right now are having a sort of a dampening effect on the economy at all.
Allison, it's pretty clear now Republicans will control both ends of Pennsylvania Avenue. They'll also control both chambers up on Capitol Hill. You know, in terms of redoing the tax code or anything, I mean, I think you're really just looking at budget reconciliation. You only get a few cracks at that, even if you're the party in power. But I wonder with Republican control, what do you see as being the biggest benefits and maybe even the biggest economic consequences of a Republican-led agenda starting next year?
Well, they can do what they want, which in some ways is good, but in some ways is bad. People always complain Congress can't get anything done. When you have every sort of branch of government in the same party, you don't have that excuse. The question is are they going to do things that we want? And I think at the very least, we'll see all of the 2017 tax cuts be made permanent. I guess it does sound like we're going to get no taxes on tips. I can't imagine that's going to go well, but, there's a campaign promise. So, and it's very popular with everyone except for economists. So I guess it's going to happen. But I mean, I don't expect, other than these like weird little like things that are no longer taxed, and making the tax cuts from 2017 permanent, big changes.
Mm-hmm. Well, as you know, the old phrase is, I think it's from Mario Cuomo, you campaign in poetry, you govern in prose. I'm very excited to see what parts of the Trump campaign rhetoric end up actually becoming an actuality for the day-to-day lives of Americans, including no taxes on tips and things like that. What's your sense? Please. Fair enough. Curious your thoughts on the budget. Obviously, we know, I think Republicans, from my years in Washington, it seemed like whatever party is in the minority tends to talk more about federal deficits. But what are your expectations for how the GOP will look to offset? I'm sure Trump will say things, like we're going to balance the budget. But realistically, I think we're still looking at increased deficits. Is that your sense? Well,
I mean, I think, Trump can be unpredictable, but I think he does have a long history of being very comfortable with debt. So we know that. He definitely is someone who definitely sees the world as, taking leverage bets, paying off. They don't always for him, but I think he sees that, and I appreciate the optimism, but not so much for federal spending. But as I said, if you look carefully at the people he's considering, say, for Treasury Secretary, they are quite worried about the debt. And even, I guess, Project 2025, who knows how much that's going to be implemented, is very debt focused. So there are people swimming around his administration who are concerned about the debt. I don't see it happening in the next 2 years, but I mean, particularly if in 2 years, Republicans lose some elections, maybe they'll get more focused on it again. I mean, I remember when early this year, when it really became clear that Trump might be in power again, some Republicans, granted, might be some motivated reasoning, claimed that because he's going to be a lame duck president, he is going to make the hard choices and start sort of reining in entitlements and debt. I personally, doesn't seem like consistent with his character to me, but you never know.
I wonder, now that we are in the lame duck period of the Biden administration, to me, Bidenomics comes down to 4 bills. 2 of them were bipartisan, but 2 of them were party line votes. Democrats used budget reconciliation to force the American Rescue Plan and Inflation Reduction Act across the finish line without any Republican votes. Have you ever had the opportunity to kind of look back at either all 4 of those bills, or especially those last 2, with a sense on what all that extra government spending actually did to the overall state of inflation? Because I think it popularly came under attack, but I don't know if it's entirely clear how that additional party line spending actually impacted the inflationary conditions for day-to-day Americans.
Well, I've seen credible estimates that the American Rescue Plan did maybe contribute 3-4 percentage points to inflation. Beyond what we would have had. So we would have had high inflation, but that did. The others, I think, less contributed to inflation as much as they made the Fed's job a little harder. Like, the increasing interest rates while they did bring down inflation, didn't seem to have much of a problem with the economy. And that might have been because it just sort of made the Fed a little less effective, more than it, say, pushed up inflation higher. I think the American Rescue Plan, there's certainly evidence of this, because that was also quite big and put a lot of money directly in people's pockets. The bills after that, I said, were more about, industrial policy, things like that. And they were like sort of putting money into the economy, which I think was overall stimulative, but not enough to sort of directly increase inflation. I think they just sort of undermine the Fed.
Finally, I'd love to get your economic view on the promises of deportations. We don't know to what scale this will be enacted. We've heard of a lot of day one promises from the incoming so-called border czar. You know, whether it's a targeted approach of 1 million or as many as the 11, 12 million plus that have been talked about by the Trump campaign. What do you economically look at as being the impact of deportations like that, the likes of which we have really not seen in this country for a long time?
Well, again, it comes down to how we do it. As I said, if indeed we just start with a couple million, mainly people who have had problems with the law, then, you know, and particularly if they replace those people, if we have real immigration reform that increases legal migration, then, you know, that could be good. But again, if we somehow, I don't even know feasibly how we could manage to deport 12 million people, that would be a huge loss of labor, particularly people who do jobs that a lot of Native Americans are unwilling to do. And they said that would increase inflation, increase wages, and lead to all sorts of problems. So, I mean, we'll see what we get.
Yeah, we certainly will. Really grateful for your time because this is a great conversation. I think helps make all of our viewers and listeners a lot smarter about what to expect come the end of January. That's Allison Schrager, Senior Fellow at Manhattan Institute and an opinion columnist at Bloomberg. Allison, thanks for your time. Great to have you.
Thanks for having me.